If I can't see the crosswalk lights from here, these drivers can't see them either. That tree needs to be trimmed.
Father's Day is a critical holiday that I think men should pay attention to, especially if they're fathers, and then if their fathers are not at home. The other thing that I find important about Father's Day is that it reminds us of the role that men play in their homes. If they're husbands, if they're fathers, or if they're estranged from their family, they still have a role to play if they have children in the lives of their children. So joining me now is a good friend, Joe Pellegrino. He is the founder of Legacy Minded Men, and he knows something about fatherhood. He's one himself, but he's also talked to a myriad of men throughout the country, thousands of men to be exact, who understand the principles of fatherhood. Joe, thanks for being on America's Hope. I think part of America's Hope is the fact that men step up to the plate and be fathers, because the statistics show that in America, fatherlessness is an epidemic in America. Is that statistic right?
That's an understatement. As a matter of fact, let me go right to the prison system. In the prisons, it's said that 95% of the men in prison have no good relationship with a man, and that being mostly their father, grandfather, or a potential mentor. That's a significant number, and it certainly explains a lot of the reasons why young men go astray. They go astray because they're looking for a man to lead them, and when there's no father checked in or even in the picture at all, they look to an older person. So this might be a 3 or 4 year old person that's 3 or 4 years older than them, i.e., a gang, and they're brought in, they're loved, they feel something, because every man, every person is born with that goal of I want to have a purposeful life, and they want to know that they're cared for and loved, no matter how hard-hearted they may be at any particular time. That is always there.
You were saying something to me earlier about Mother's Day in the church and how that's so celebrated. Talk to me about that against the backdrop of Father's Day.
Well, the two best attended services in any church here are Christmas and Easter. The next one is generally considered to be Mother's Day. Now, on Mother's Day, Mom gets up and says, "Hey, Johnny, you haven't been to church in a while, but it's Mother's Day. Could you please come?" She goes to church. She most likely gets a rose, and the pastor talks about Proverbs 31. It's all just a blessing to the mom. Father's Day, on the other hand, is one of the least best attended services. Why? Well, man gets up and he says, "Well, you know what? It's my day. I'm going to go play golf." And then the boys say, "Well, Mom, if Dad's going to play golf, we want to be with Dad because it's Father's Day." But if he does make it to church, a lot of times the pastor or the priest, whoever it might be, kind of points a finger at the guys and say, "Guys, we got to do a better job. We've got to be men. We got to do this." So the difference is, one is an encouraging piece. The other one is generally it's a little more.
I was up in the parking lot down a little 5 Points, right? And I was parked across the street from the back of the storefronts, across the parking lot. Then all of a sudden I see movement. And I look, someone is pulling a blanket into the dumpster. As often as I've been without a place to go, I would never have slept in a dumpster. Oh, and by the way, it's the United States Army's birthday. And the flag.
So they can serve this nation. Onlookers shared how they felt watching the festivities and learning about the values of the Army. I would say thank you very much to the U.S. Army, and I'm very much appreciative of U.S. Army. I've seen the event over there going on around an hour ago. So far, everything has been so good. Keep protecting the U.S., I guess. Happy birthday to the U.S. Army. The United States Army continues to uphold the theme of honoring the past and protecting the future as it raises the next generation of leaders. Fiona G., NTD News.
People living in the Northeast will soon.
Guess what, folks? They're reinstating the draft. Ah, now you can get your education paid for.
I don't think so. There's no currency that's going to replace the dollar. Europeans are too divided to really have that kind of pull with the euro, and the yuan is never going to do it because the Chinese Communist Party is never going to allow the yuan to be freely convertible. So I think this is Saudi Arabia basically doing what Saudi Arabia thinks is in its own best interests. There again, I think in the Middle East, we're going to have a change if we do get a new administration, because hopefully we'll begin to stifle the Iranians again, like we were doing before. I think that needs to happen. And I think we need to restart the Abraham Accords. This can all be pointed to just really not thinking strategically about the region. And, having Saudi Arabia drift further and further away from the United States is not good for either Saudi Arabia or the United States.
On that note, many have called, say, Trump's policies more isolationist. How do you see that fitting into something like the Middle East?
I think they're actually more realist, and we have to be very clear-eyed about, the threat that is posed by a China that looks to be even more powerful than the Soviet Union was economically, and they're using that economic might to encourage other countries to be on their side in this ideological competition or conflict. It's a Cold War, and I think unless we figure out that we have to treat this in terms of what is in America's best interest, and not just go have a strategy based on more or less on talking points. And I think we're going to continue to have struggles, and we're going to continue to have things like the Russia-Ukraine conflict be an expense to the American taxpayer on an annual basis.
Joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on. Congresswoman, former President Trump returning to Capitol Hill for the first time in quite some time, meeting with House Republicans this morning. What can you tell us about that meeting?
Well, it was kind of a triumphant return. He got a standing ovation from House Republicans, a very warm welcome and a nice reception. He was kind of on a roll this morning, very optimistic, very positive, on message about things that he's hearing around the country as he's doing these massive events and having record crowds in places like New Jersey and the Bronx. So he's pumped, he's ready, he's fired up, and it was inspiring to see him.
Despite all of the legal challenges that the former president is having and has had, what are you hearing from your constituents when it comes to policy?
They still love President Trump. In my district, people do like the former president and are still very supportive of him despite all of the legal issues. And they see it very much as a political prosecution, a weaponization of government. Those are the things that I hear repeatedly. Now, there are people on both sides of the aisle that have questions or concerns, but the vast majority of people I talk to are still very much supportive of President Trump, and in fact, after the conviction, more supportive of President Trump.
Switching gears a little bit, I think one of the main policy issues that a lot of people liked about the former president was the way that he addressed the southern border, the porousness of it. We just saw recently 8 suspected terrorists with links to ISIS arrested by the FBI. How concerning is this to you, and how much do you think the border is going to play into this year's election?
It's extremely concerning. I think it's the number one issue. It's certainly a national security issue. I visited the border twice, both when I first took office and then a year later. And a year later, it was much worse. President Trump commented today how much worse it is. Both of us are thinking that we didn't think it could get worse, but it has, clearly. We've seen terrorists arrested in this country. We know they're here. We've had 1.5 million gotaways. There has to be, even if only 1% of those are intent to do harm to America, that's a huge number of people. So President Trump had secured the border with an executive order on day one. After visiting the border, I said if anyone saw what I saw, they would declare a national emergency and they would close the southern border.
We sometimes is a border state. Obviously, Indiana, your home state, is not a border state. But when you see these known terrorists with links to ISIS being rounded up in New York, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, these are not border states, but it's a direct reflection of what's happening at the border.
Yeah, we hear that repeatedly. Like every state is a border state. Primarily, that's driven in Indiana by the fentanyl crisis. You know, fentanyl's coming across the southern border, the poorest southern border in record numbers. But now you're seeing these terrorists picked up in these cities. It's no wonder. I thank the FBI for finding them. I fear that there are many, many more. I hope that we don't see an attack on U.S. soil. But with a wide open border with nearly 10 million people that have come across the border illegally, there's going to be, I think, a breaking point, which is why it's so critical that we elect President Trump in November to secure the border and get back to a safe America.
Lastly, what was the former president's message to House Republicans today?
That we're going to win in November, that we're going to win big in November, that he is getting a positive response everywhere he goes. I think that's clear by the number of people that are showing up to see him. He's not deterred. He knows that this is the most important election of our lifetime.
Congresswoman Erin Houchin, thank you so much.
Thank you.